Tonight, let's step back into a forgotten chapter of history. One that smells of smoke and old iron. One that hums with the slow rhythm of a blacksmith's life, lived in quiet repetition. In the still dark corners of a medieval village where the sky stayed gray with soot and the days folded in on themselves like worn leather. Not the tales of kings or knights. No glory, no gold, just a man, a hammer, and the sound of heat eating through silence. The forge waits for us. Quiet now, its flames long since gone cold. The anvil slick with ash dust, untouched for years. But if we listen closely, if we lie still enough, we might still hear the breath of bellows, the creak of iron hinges, the sigh of boots on dirt. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Is your room dark enough? Can you feel the blanket rise and fall with each breath? Let your arms go heavy. Let your eyes drift, not closed, just soft. And imagine that old stone building, slumped between a baker's chimney and a silent stable. No sign, no greetings. Only a soot-black door hung crooked on hinges forged by the hand that now sleeps beneath the floorboards. We're going to visit him tonight. Not to speak, not to wake, just to remember. Let the lights dim, let the coals fade, let your breath slow, and let the world go quiet. We'll begin with the house, behind the smithy. Before the fire was ever lit, before the first nail was shaped, before the forge hissed beneath its stone dome, there was a house, small, crooked, and leaning to one side like an old man dozing in a chapel pew. It stood behind the smithy, just far enough to avoid the sparks, just near enough to carry the heat through the walls in winter. Its roof sagged under the weight of too many seasons. Thatch, patched with hay and strips of wool, leaked in 3 places when the rain fell too long. Inside, the wood beams bowed low, thick with the scent of grease and hearth smoke, as if the very bones of the house were sweating out years of unspoken things. In the mornings, the floor was cold enough to make a grown man wince. Even in summer, the stone beneath bare feet felt like waking in the middle of a pond. The boy always stepped lightly, even when he wasn't told to. The boards creaked if they were asked too much. And his father hated creaks before sunrise. There were only 3 rooms. One where the bread was kept, another where sleep came hard, and a third where rusted tools hung beside strips of drying cloth. That room was not quite kitchen, not quite workroom. It was where repairs happened. Stitches, sharpening, scoldings. A heavy table with dents like thumbprints from men too tired to aim straight. No one ever laughed in that room, though sometimes, if the wind was right, it smelled of thyme from the neighbor's garden and felt almost gentle. The mother had long fingers. They moved through dough, the same way his father's moved through molten iron. Firm, deliberate, always a little sad. She was quieter than most women in the village. When she did speak, her voice sounded like the tail end of a candle, warm but fading. She washed by the basin each morning, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and when she scrubbed his neck, she always paused on the back of it, as if to remember something soft that had once lived there. At the center of the sleeping room was a bed of straw, bound in linen, and covered with a blanket that smelled faintly of old wool, fire, and time. It sagged in the middle, where the boy slept beside the wall. His father's legs always hung over the edge, his boots never far from reach. When the wind picked up, it found ways through the shutter slats, whistling low through the room like a ghost with nowhere better to be. Mornings began in half-light, the kind of light that didn't rise so much as seep through cracks. He would wake to the sound of metal, never loud, but present. A gentle clink of something being moved just outside the door. A hook, a chain. Maybe the iron key that hung from the smith's belt like a relic. Sometimes there were words, but they were too hushed to understand. Grumble. The scrape of flint. Then came the smell. That familiar scent of damp wood pushed too quickly into flame. He would lie still, listening until the first cough. His father always coughed once when the forge was lit, deep and dry, like the sound a tree makes when it gives up another ring. On the wall above the bed hung a square of cloth embroidered with a symbol he didn't recognize. It had been there longer than he could remember. When he asked once what it meant, his mother simply said, "Old things," and that was all. He stared at it often in the half-dark, wondering if it watched him back. The boy had a habit of breathing in slow when he woke, just to see if the air was warm yet. If it was, the forge had already caught. If not, he had time to lie still. Maybe enough time for one last dream. But dreams were rare in that house, not because they weren't allowed, but because they didn't last. They curled and vanished the moment the door opened, the moment bootsteps moved across the stone. In that house, laughter lived short lives. Joy had to whisper, and rest never stayed long. There was no rooster, no bell. The day began with the striking of iron, not song, and once it began, there was no pause. No breakfast first, just work, always work. A blacksmith's home was not like other homes in the village. It breathed differently. It groaned and rattled like the frame of a wheel that had been mended too many times. Even the walls had a kind of ache to them, as if they remembered every blow, every winter, every quiet argument swallowed between mouthfuls of boiled oats. On certain days, the ones when the sky stayed pale and the wind pushed from the east, the boy's mother would press her fingers into the small of his back before he rose. Just once, a soft, grounding thing, a reminder perhaps that he was still soft beneath all that soot, that his bones were still young, still shaping. She never said it, but her hands always knew how to speak. There was no door between the house and the smithy, just a narrow hallway with a cracked beam overhead. It tilted, and you had to duck, even if you were small. That beam had claimed more scalps than it cared to count, but no one fixed it. It was as much a part of the place as the hearth or the smoke-stained ceiling. Something about it kept the years together. At night, the house dimmed early. Oil was too dear, and candles burned fast. Most evenings ended by the fire with only the embers left to light the room. They would sit in near silence, their shadows moving like forgotten memories on the stone. His father rarely spoke then, shoulders rounded, his eyes too red from heat and hours. He would run a rag across his arms, slow and thoughtless, over and over, as if he were still trying to wipe the day away. Sleep where the forge once stood. There had been another boy once. Older, maybe 15, maybe more. No one remembered for certain. Not even the blacksmith, not even the mother who rarely forgot anything. The village simply said he was there before, and then one day not. He had no family name. Or if he did, it wasn't shared. Just an apprentice, taken in one winter when the roads froze, and even the dogs cried through the night. His boots were too thin, his voice too soft, his eyes quiet in a way that made even the priest blink. He worked well, quick hands, lean arms, back already shaped to bending. He came early, left late, ate little, and he rarely spoke. Not out of rudeness, just absence. Like his words had been used up somewhere else. The boy remembered him not clearly, but in fragments. The way his fingers trembled after lifting the water pail. The thin white scar that ran along his right wrist. The way he always looked up at the roof beams when the fire hissed too loud. He'd been there for 6 months. Then came the morning. The tongs slipped. It was no one's fault. The handle had split age and heat and time, too much weight on too little grip. The glowing iron bar slid free and hit the ground with a sickening hiss. A mark scorched into the stone. The floor screamed for half a second, then fell silent. The apprentice didn't move, didn't reach to grab another pair, didn't apologize. He just stood there, watching the smoke rise. His eyes were wide, but not with fear, not even shame, just stillness. His hand lowered, slowly, and he stared at it for a long time. The blacksmith said nothing, neither did the boy. They all just listened to the quiet of a mistake, too heavy for noise. After that, the apprentice stayed. For a while, but something was gone. He worked slower, never reached for the tongs again. The fire began to fear him, maybe, or he it. Some days he would walk the perimeter of the forge, as though tracing a circle he couldn't step out of. Some days he didn't come in at all, just sat outside the door, staring at the horizon where the trees met the sky like a seam torn too wide. And one night, he didn't return. No one saw him leave. No bags packed. No tools missing. The cot was still warm when the boy woke. Only the apprentice's gloves were gonna burnt at the edges, fingers stiff with soot. The rest was silent. The blacksmith didn't look for him. He simply took the gloves from their hook and laid them behind the rack where no one swept, the place where old tools went to sleep. The mother didn't ask questions. She just cooked one portion less the next day, and the forge carried on, but the boy remembered. He remembered the shape of someone broken in a way that couldn't be mended with heat or hammer. He remembered the way silence can grow louder than any strike on iron, and he remembered the apprentice's breath held too long, too often as if afraid to share even that with the world. Now, years later, the boy sometimes found himself standing in that same spot, near the scar in the stone, just looking, not at anything in particular, just listening to the air where a voice used to be. He wondered if the fire remembered him, the one who left, the one who never said goodbye. And if the forge held that silence like it held all the others, tucked deep in the cracks of the anvil stand, whispered behind the bellows, resting in the ash no broom could touch. Let your thoughts still now. Let the quiet settle around you. Shh. Not all absences are empty. Sometimes the boy's mother would hum, not a tune. It's just sound. Gentle, broken, like the hush of reeds and river wind. And when she did, it was the only thing in that house that didn't hurt to listen to. He fell asleep most nights with the weight of work waiting on the other side of his eyelids. He knew how many nails were left. He knew the rhythm of the bellows. He knew the sound of leather hardening too fast in winter air. These were the things he slept beside. And outside, behind the house, the anvil waited. Cold, patient, eternal. The house didn't dream, but the boy did. Sometimes of rivers, sometimes of birds, but mostly of the way his father's hand paused in midair, just before each strike. The moment between breath and impact, the stillness before the blow. And somewhere in the dark, the old embroidered cloth swayed just slightly, as if it remembered too. Let your breath slow now. Let your limbs go soft. Let the night settle around you. The fire hasn't started yet. There's still time for one more dream. It always began before light. Not the soft blue haze of early sun. Not even the pale breath of dawn that curled through the shutters. No, the first thing to come was the hammer, the sound of it. Distant but deep, rolling through stone and wood like a second heartbeat. The boy never needed to rise to know it had started. He simply listened. Listened for that first thunk. Not the bright clang of iron meeting anvil, but the thick, low blow of wood on coal, the signal that the fire was being stirred awake. It was a language the forge spoke to itself before any eyes opened to it. His father never muttered, never yawned. He simply rose. Boots on before breath, hands already bearing the weight of what the day demanded. No candle was lit. He had walked those steps for so many years he could find his way blind. One hand brushing the low stone wall as he passed through the crooked hallway into the smithy. Then came the scrape. Metal dragged across slate. Maybe the poker. Maybe the rod used to break apart the old coals. The sound shifted with the season. Sharp in spring, dull in winter, muted in rain. The boy, still wrapped in wool and half sleep, counted each sound like prayer beads. It helped to soften what came next. The fire caught slow on most mornings. It's not because the wood was wet. His father never allowed that. But because the forge had a memory. A stubbornness. It remembered the hands that lit it. It waited each day to see if the man had changed. He never had. But still, the fire asked. And once the heat took, once the coals sighed into flame, the real hammering began. The anvil had a tone, not a ring, a voice. Each blow echoed with it, a resonance that lived inside the metal, not above it. The boy learned its moods. Flat tone meant the hammer had struck at an angle. A high note meant the iron was still too cool. Sudden clatter meant something had slipped, and soon there would be a silence heavy enough to sting. He lay there, eyes closed, as the hammer struck again. And again, each time slower than the last, like waves softening against the shore. There was no rush, no chaos. My father's hammer followed breath, not time. Swing a measured offering, not a punishment. In the house behind the smithy, the boy's mother moved without shoes. Her steps were so soft, they barely disturbed the air. She stirred oats in a cracked clay pot, the spoon circling with the same tired rhythm as the hammer outside. She never needed to ask what her husband was making. The sound told her. Longer ring, horseshoe, short bursts in pairs, hinges. A sharper rhythm, clean and hollow, knife. It was all there, hidden in the sound. The boy would sometimes sit in the bed, knees pulled tight, trying to hum the rhythm aloud, a way of understanding his father without speaking to him. He wasn't allowed into the smithy until he'd been called, and he hadn't yet. The hammer was his father's voice, not just his trade. It was how he spoke when words failed, which they often did. Once, in the dead middle of a winter's night, the hammer rang out suddenly. 3 strikes. Not 4, not 2, just 3. The boy sat up straight in bed. Something about it was wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. The next morning, when he finally stepped past the doorway and saw the forge, he understood. The old sign, the one that hung above the door with a single iron loop, had cracked in the frost. It had been his grandfather's, carved into a block of oak, and the metal had grown brittle where it met the wood. His father had struck it down himself without a word. 3 blows to the base, sound of the past falling without ceremony. And when the boy asked what would go there now, the man simply said, nothing. Some sounds never came back. But each morning, without fail, the hammer did. Outside the smithy, the village stirred slower. Bakers lit their ovens. A single goat bleated from the far field. Somewhere, a cart rolled over loose stones. But none of those noises reached into the bones the way the hammer did. It was the kind of sound that lived inside the earth itself, and the kind that stayed ringing in your teeth even after the forge went cold. The boy finally rose. Pulled on the rough-spun tunic that hung on the wall. It was too short now. Wrists bare, ankles showing, but there would be no new one until the harvest. He crossed the room and stood just at the edge of the hallway, where the scent of heat grew stronger, and the light flickered in reddish-orange waves against the stone. He dared a peek. There his father stood, bareheaded, sleeves rolled, eyes set deep beneath a layer of sweat and soot. He moved with a kind of stillness, the kind that only came from repetition so perfect it needed no thought. The hammer was not an extension of his hand. It was his hand. When it struck, the entire world seemed to bend around the sound. The boy stayed there, breathing in the smoke, letting it fill the soft space behind his eyes. He imagined what it felt like, to hold that weight, to decide where the blow would fall, to change the shape of the world with nothing but heat and pressure. But he knew better than to step inside. Not yet. His father paused between strikes, turned slightly. Not enough to meet his son's eyes, just enough to show that he had noticed. The silence between blows stretched long. Then slowly, he nodded once. That was the first time the boy was allowed inside while the hammer still moved. Sometimes the boy's mother would hum, not a tune. It's just sound. Gentle, broken, like the hush of reeds and river wind. And when she did, it was the only thing in that house that didn't hurt to listen to. He fell asleep most nights with the weight of work waiting on the other side of his eyelids. He knew how many nails were left. He knew the rhythm of the bellows. He knew the sound of leather hardening too fast in winter air. These were the things he slept beside. And outside, behind the house, the anvil waited. Cold, patient, eternal. The house didn't dream, but the boy did. Sometimes of rivers, sometimes of birds, but mostly of the way his father's hand paused in midair, just before each strike. The moment between breath and impact. The stillness before the blow. And somewhere in the dark, the old embroidered cloth swayed just slightly, as if it remembered too. Let your breath slow now. Let your limbs go soft. Let the night settle around you. The fire hasn't started yet. There's still time for one more dream. It always began before light. Not the soft blue haze of early sun. Not even the pale breath of dawn that curled through the shutters. No, the first thing to come was the hammer, the sound of it. Distant but deep, rolling through stone and wood like a second heartbeat. The boy never needed to rise to know it had started. He simply listened. Listened for that first thunk. Not the bright clang of iron meeting anvil, but the thick, low blow of wood on coal, the signal that the fire was being stirred awake. It was a language the forge spoke to itself before any eyes opened to it. His father never muttered, never yawned. He simply rose. Boots on before breath, hands already bearing the weight of what the day demanded. No candle was lit. He had walked those steps for so many years he could find his way blind. One hand brushing the low stone wall as he passed through the crooked hallway into the smithy. Then came the scrape. Metal dragged across slate. Maybe the poker, maybe the rod used to break apart the old coals. The sound shifted with the season, sharp in spring, dull in winter, muted in rain. The boy, still wrapped in wool and half-sleep, counted each sound like prayer beads. It helped to soften what came next. The fire caught slow on most mornings. It's not because the wood was wet. His father never allowed that. But because the forge had a memory, a stubbornness. It remembered the hands that lit it. It waited each day to see if the man had changed. He never had. But still, the fire asked. And once the heat took, once the coals sighed into flame, the real hammering began. The anvil had a tone, not a ring, a voice. Each blow echoed with it, a resonance that lived inside the metal, not above it. The boy learned its moods. Flat tone meant the hammer had struck at an angle. A high note meant the iron was still too cool. Sudden clatter meant something had slipped, and soon there would be a silence heavy enough to sting. He lay there, eyes closed, as the hammer struck again. And again, each time slower than the last, like waves softening against the shore. There was no rush, no chaos. My father's hammer followed breath, not time. Swing a measured offering, not a punishment. In the house behind the smithy, the boy's mother moved without shoes. Her steps were so soft, they barely disturbed the air. She stirred oats in a cracked clay pot, the spoon circling with the same tired rhythm as the hammer outside. She never needed to ask what her husband was making. The sound told her. A longer ring, horseshoe, short bursts in pairs, hinges. A sharper rhythm, clean and hollow, knife. It was all there, hidden in the sound. The boy would sometimes sit in the bed, knees pulled tight, trying to hum the rhythm aloud, a way of understanding his father without speaking to him. He wasn't allowed into the smithy until he'd been called, and he hadn't yet. The hammer was his father's voice, not just his trade. It was how he spoke when words failed, which they often did. Once, in the dead middle of a winter's night, the hammer rang out suddenly. 3 strikes. Not 4, not 2, just 3. The boy sat up straight in bed. Something about it was wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. The next morning, when he finally stepped past the doorway and saw the forge, he understood. The old sign, the one that hung above the door with a single iron loop, had cracked in the frost. It had been his grandfather's, carved into a block of oak, and the metal had grown brittle where it met the wood. His father had struck it down himself without a word. 3 blows to the base, sound of the past falling without ceremony. And when the boy asked what would go there now, the man simply said, nothing. Some sounds never came back. But each morning, without fail, the hammer did. Outside the smithy, the village stirred slower. Bakers lit their ovens. A single goat bleated from the far field. Somewhere, a cart rolled over loose stones. But none of those noises reached into the bones the way the hammer did. It was the kind of sound that lived inside the earth itself, and the kind that stayed ringing in your teeth even after the forge went cold. The boy finally rose. Pulled on the rough-spun tunic that hung on the wall. It was too short now. Wrists bare, ankles showing, but there would be no new one until the harvest. He crossed the room and stood just at the edge of the hallway, where the scent of heat grew stronger, and the light flickered in reddish-orange waves against the stone. He dared a peek. There his father stood, bareheaded, sleeves rolled, eyes set deep beneath a layer of sweat and soot. He moved with a kind of stillness, the kind that only came from repetition so perfect it needed no thought. The hammer was not an extension of his hand. It was his hand. When it struck, the entire world seemed to bend around the sound. The boy stayed there, breathing in the smoke, letting it fill the soft space behind his eyes. He imagined what it felt like, to hold that weight, to decide where the blow would fall, to change the shape of the world with nothing but heat and pressure. But he knew better than to step inside. Not yet. His father paused between strikes, turned slightly. Not enough to meet his son's eyes, just enough to show that he had noticed. The silence between blows stretched long. Then slowly, he nodded once. That was the first time the boy was allowed inside while the hammer still moved. The room was hotter than he imagined. The walls shimmered with heat. The stone under his feet pulsed with the memory of fire. Sparks danced in the air like insects made of gold. And yet, even in the midst of it all, the boy noticed something else. Yes! The silence that lived between each strike. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of all the things never said. All the moments that could have broken, but didn't. All the weight his father carried that never showed in his shoulders, only in the sound the hammer made when it fell. And so he stood there, just behind the line of shadow as the rhythm began again. Thunk, pause, thunk, pause. The forge hummed. The anvil rang, and the boy's breath slowed, to match the silence in between. Let yours slow, too. Feel the sound, not the story. The hammer's done for now. The fire is dreaming again. And soon the boy will try to lift it, but not yet. Sleep in the stillness between the strikes. The first time he touched the bellows, it wasn't planned. His father hadn't asked. There were no instructions, no nods of permission. Just the quiet panic of windless fire and a man's arms too full to reach for it himself. The forge was lit, but sluggish. Coals smoldered, low and reluctant. The kind of fire that sulks when fed too quickly, that folds in on itself if not coaxed just right. His father was bent low, iron cooling fast between the tongs, jaw tight with the strain of moments slipping away. There wasn't time to speak, so the boy stepped forward. The bellows were larger than him, almost absurd in size. Leather stitched like tired lungs, wooden arms splintered from decades of reach. They hissed when handled wrong. They sulked when pulled too fast. They could be gentle when respected, but cruel when rushed. He gripped the handle with both hands. His palms were slick already, not from sweat, but from something more nameless. Anticipation, maybe. Or the weight of doing something no one had said he could do. The lever moved stiff at first, then gave way, jerking downward with a groan that echoed through the stone. A breath of air surged beneath the forge. A brief flicker, a pop, then the fire answered. Not much, not yet, but it noticed. His father didn't look at him. Not fully, but his shoulders shifted the smallest movement, like someone had just set a tool in the right place. Didn't speak, just turned the metal again, testing the glow on its surface, and kept working. The boy stayed at the bellows. He found a rhythm eventually. It wasn't perfect, not close, but it was something. The handle felt less foreign each time he pulled. The hiss of air through the pipe no longer startled him. There was a satisfaction to it, a kind of communion, like speaking a secret language. The fire was just beginning to trust. The heat reached his face in steady pulses now, as if the forge itself was breathing back at him, alive, not wild, just present. But the bellows were heavy, too heavy. After 10 pulls, his shoulders began to ache. After 20, his elbows burned. Legs trembled from bracing so long. The handle slipped once and snapped back, and he stumbled sideways, the wood catching his thigh with a dull, punishing thud. He gritted his teeth but made no sound. A blacksmith's son doesn't cry in the forge. His father paused again. Not in frustration, in memory. It's the same way he might have when the hammer first bruised his palms, when he first missed the timing of a shoe or burned a glove beyond use. The moment of watching someone else begin where you once failed. Still, he didn't speak. T could have been the twitch of a nerve, a breath caught wrong. His thumb brushed the joint of the tongs, not the handle, but the point where metal meets metal, just a few inches closer to the heat. A place that looks safe until it isn't. It was only a second. Less, even. But pain does not measure time the same way. It sang through him, not with a scream, but with silence. He gasped, pulled back, and dropped the tongs. The horseshoe clattered to the floor, hissing against the stone. His hand curled in reflex, already weeping with bright raised skin. The kind of burn that doesn't scab, just blisters, rises, and pulses with every heartbeat like it wants to speak. His father said nothing. He didn't move at first. Then calmly, he knelt, picked up the horseshoe with a rag, set it back in the fire, adjusted the coals. Only then did he look at the boy. He didn't ask if it hurt, didn't say he was sorry. He didn't even check the burn, just said low and even, you'll know the heat better now. The boy wanted to cry. He didn't, but he wanted to. It's not from the pain. Though it was sharp, it had already dulled into something deep and throbbing. No, it was the weight of being expected to carry that pain without flinching. To join a world where burns were not mistakes, but memories. His mother wrapped the thumb that night. She didn't ask what happened. She just hummed softly while she pressed the cloth around it, damp with cool herbs, her fingers moving with the patience of someone who had seen this before, more than once. The boy watched her hands as she worked, pale worn with the quiet strength of someone who carried pain in quieter places. She kissed the bandage once, and then said nothing. He slept that night with his hand outside the blanket, pulsed against the air. Each heartbeat felt like a whisper from the fire, repeating what his father had said. "You'll know the heat better now." In the days that followed, the blister opened, then dried, then hardened, and soon it stopped hurting. But it never quite faded. Even as he grew, even when his hands thickened and scarred over, that spot remained. Smooth, shiny, pink like the first petal of a crushed rose. His first burn, his first lesson. A quiet mark left by a forge that had begun to recognize him. Let your hands rest now. Let the heat drift away. The fire is watching, but it won't touch. Not tonight. Tonight even the pain remembers softly. Sleep beneath the bandage. Some mornings came cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Before the fire stirred. Before the coals remembered how to glow. Before his father opened the smithy door with that slow, careful weight, as if not to wake something sleeping beneath the stone floor. There was a silence that didn't belong to the village, or to birds, or to God. It belonged to the forge, and to those who lived beside it. These were the mornings the boy remembered longest. The ones where breath curled white in front of his face, even indoors. Where the stone floor felt like ice, and every board creaked as if protesting its own age. When there was no light yet, only a blue kind of darkness. Not night, not quite morning. It's just something in between. He would wake before the sounds, before the hammer, before even the bellows sighed their first tired breath. There was no rooster, no clang of church bell. Just the strange quiet that settled over the house when the fire hadn't yet been fed. The kind of quiet that made him feel like the last person still dreaming. His blanket was thin, and the straw beneath him had gone flat weeks ago. But still, he lay there, eyes half open, listening for the breath of fire. It hadn't come yet, which meant his father hadn't risen, which meant the world hadn't started. Not yet. There was comfort in that space, as though time waited. He would sit up slowly, careful not to stir the blanket too fast. The rustling sound would travel. His mother lay still nearby, her breathing soft, steady, a rhythm steadier than anything in the forge. A rhythm that held the house together when the roof leaked or the firewood ran low. Some mornings, she opened her eyes too, just for a moment. And if she caught him watching her, she would offer the smallest nod. Not a command, not a question, just, "Yes, it's cold. Yes, it is early. Yes, we are still here." He would slip from the bed and pull on his tunic, stiff with soot at the sleeves. His toes curled on the stones, avoiding the spot by the door where last week's spilled iron filings had settled in. He'd meant to sweep it, but the days ran out too fast. The hallway to the smithy was colder still, the kind of cold that bit the teeth and made the breath come out in little huffs. He stepped through it slow, as though the air itself might crack if disturbed. Inside, the forge loomed dark, not lifeless, just resting. Even in sleep it held presence. The hearth like a great mouth shut tight, the anvil cloaked in shadow, the tools resting exactly where they'd been left.
Ow.
Each one still warm in memory, if not in truth. He would cross to the side wall and kneel by the old charcoal bin. The lid stuck sometimes, and he had to lean his whole weight into it. The smell inside was sharp and earthy, the scent of trees that had been broken down to their barest black truth. With cold fingers, he'd lift pieces, laying them gently near the hearth, careful not to clatter. He liked this part. The quiet offering, preparing the bed for the fire, like someone making ready a guest room for a friend who always arrived without knocking. Then the tinder, then the shavings. All left dry from the night before, wrapped in old cloth and tucked beneath the stone. And then he would wait. Not light it. Not yet. That was still his father's right. His father lit the forge. Always. The boy just listened. For boots on stone. For the door creaking open. For that short breath his father took every morning before he stepped into the heat. A breath like he was leaving behind the rest of the world again, stepping into a space only he could live in. It was always the same breath. And then he would appear, shoulders already set, hands already soot-marked, from some work done even before rising. The boy would step back without speaking, and his father would nod once, bend low, strike flint to steel. Sparks danced like tiny ghosts. The tinder caught with a whisper, and the fire breathed in again. There were mornings the boy didn't move at all, didn't fetch the coal, didn't touch the shavings. Just sat by the forge, silent, waiting for it to wake. He liked to imagine it dreamed of all the things it had made. Nails bent and straight, hinges that creaked in empty halls, swords that had never drawn blood, wheels that rolled far past the edge of town. He wondered if the fire remembered his first burn, or the smell of his father's gloves, or the sound of a finished blade cooling in the trough, steam rising like incense. Mornings he imagined the fire knew him, not as the smith's boy, but as its own, a quiet visitor, soft breath beside its roar. Eventually, the heat would rise. The forge would glow, the walls would shimmer with light again, and the stillness, that fragile sacred silence, would slip away, replaced by hammers, by rhythm, by heat, but for a little while, just a few moments before all that. There was a space for listening, for becoming, and for remembering that even fire has to wake slowly. Let your thoughts go slow now. Let the morning stay far. No need to light anything yet. The coals are sleeping, and so are you. Winter changed the forge in ways no other season dared. Not just the cold, that was expected, but the silence it brought. The kind that seemed to press itself into the walls, into the spaces between hammer blows, into the folds of every stiff ash-dusted blanket hanging near the hearth. The forge still burned, yes, but it was different. The fire no longer danced. It worked. Harder, slower, lower. Like the flame itself had to remember how to live through the frost. That winter, the boy learned the weight of wool. Not as something soft and warm, but as something that trapped smoke, that held heat only until the snow found your boots again, that clung to your arms long after you'd stepped too close to the fire. The sleeves of his tunic were always rolled now, not for comfort, but because they'd already scorched once. Singed wool had a smell. Not like wood, not like hair. It was sharper, more bitter, something between ruin and warning. Boy could pick it from the air, even in other houses, even on other people. Meant someone had leaned too near, had turned too fast, had made the fire just a little too angry. His own sleeve had caught on a Tuesday. He remembered that because Tuesday was when the baker's daughter brought her father's broken cartwheel. She never came early. Always afternoon, cheeks red with wind, cloak wrapped tight. Her breath rose in steady clouds, and her voice always sounded hoarse, like she hadn't spoken since sunrise. Waited at the edge of the smithy, never crossed the doorway. That day, the boy tried to carry the wheel inside himself, tried to prove something he hadn't yet named. His boot slid, his body turned, and his elbow just the edge, grazed the lip of the forge where a burst of flame had found the opening. It was only a flicker, but that's all it needed. The edge of his wool sleeve curled instantly, blackening, the fibers curling in on themselves like paper pulled into a candle's mouth. It didn't hurt, not at first. Just the smell, that sharp, unmistakable sting of something being taken. His father slapped it down before words were spoken. A thick glove, one hit, then silence. No scolding, no sound, just the smell. It followed him all day. Even after the tunic was scrubbed, even after the sleeve was mended with a patch that didn't quite match, the scent stayed. On his hands, in his nose, in the air near his bed, long after the fire had died down and the night wind slid in under the shutter gaps. He began to notice it on others too. The older smith in the next village, the leather worker's boy. Even the priest, who kept a forge of his own behind the chapel to mend the iron rings that held the gate shut in storms. They all smelled faintly of it, singed wool, a mark of having gone too close, a reminder that winter made fire hungry. And yet, fire was kinder in some ways during the cold. Its heat was a gift now, not just a tool. The forge warmed the room in ways blankets never could. Crept up the walls, wrapped itself around boots, settled in the fingers like something old and alive. On the coldest days, the boy would hover near it between tasks, letting the warmth bite into his knees, letting his breath come slow again. His mother kept his spare tunic on the hearthstones to dry, the one with the fraying collar and a hole at the shoulder. She folded it tightly each morning, pressing the sleeves into place like smoothing old parchment. It always smelled faintly of thyme and ash. On rare days, when the snow fell too fast and no carts came down the road, and even the loudest dogs slept through the afternoon, his father would set the tools down early, not from laziness, from understanding. Even iron knew when to rest. Those nights they would sit in the half-dark of the smithy, the fire low, the coals huddled in on themselves like sleeping animals. The boy would sit cross-legged, palms turned toward the warmth, his burnt sleeve always nearest the flame, always watching, always remembering the smell. His father didn't speak on those nights, just leaned back against the wall, arms folded, eyes half shut. The boy sometimes imagined they were both listening to the same thing, the low sound of coals shifting, of wood giving up its final breath, of wind pressing soft against the outer door. That was winter. Not just frost and ice and shivering boots, but silence and the smell of wool that had come too close. Let your arms rest now. Let the warmth return. The fire is low but steady. Head up. The sleeves are mended. The wind is past, and the burn remembers only softly now. Sleep in the hush that winter leaves behind. The boy learned early that the forge changed people. Not just the smiths, not just those who worked in its heat every day, but the ones who came to it. Customers, travelers, lords, merchants, soldiers, they entered one way and left another. They arrived with stiff shoulders, loud voices, soft hands. They left quieter, warier, as if the fire had shown them something they didn't want to see. Some had eyes like winter ponds, wide, pale, unblinking. Cold, not because they were cruel, but because they didn't see the boy at all. They saw only the work, the hammer, the iron, the waiting shape. Most didn't use his name. Some didn't know it. He was the boy, the hand, the helper, the lad, the one who fetched water, who swept filings, who carried finished tools to the bench and returned old ones to the wall. To them, he was the wall, part of the building, not the blood inside it. And so, he learned to look without being seen, to stand still near the coals just inside the shadow of the rack where old hinges hung in rows like iron teeth, to watch without watching, to listen. The forge had its own rules. Customers came with coin or bartered goods. Some brought goatskins, bundles of wool, sacks of barley tied with fraying rope. The exchange was not quick. It was never quick. They would stand beside the anvil, eyes tracing every strike, brows twitching with every spark. They always flinched at the first clang, even if they tried not to, and always without fail. Their eyes darkened after the fifth or sixth blow, as if the noise worked its way deeper than they expected. The boy noticed it most in the noblemen. They came with fine coats, deep hoods, riding gloves still lined in silk. They smelled of herbs, oil, horse. Their boots tracked mud into the forge without apology. They would speak to his father, low-clipped voices, asking for blades, spurs, stirrups, bridles, things meant for control, things meant for pain. They never lingered, but they always watched. One man came in winter, wrapped in a cloak darker than the walls, his hands clasped behind him, as if even standing in the forge made him dirty. He wanted a sword reforged, not sharpened, redone. The hilt needed reshaping. The blade had been notched near the edge. He said little about how it happened. The boy brought the piece to the hearth. He remembered the sound it made, not a clean clink like most iron, but a duller note, a tired sound, as if the blade didn't want to be here again. His father worked slow, with a concentration the boy had only seen once or twice. Each strike was smaller than usual, controlled, as if he was not shaping iron, but containing it. The man watched from the side. He never sat, never blinked. And when the sword was finished, still warm in its scabbard, he nodded once, handed over a pouch, and left without another word. That night, his father said nothing. He scrubbed the tongs twice before hanging them back, stirred the coals longer than usual, eyes far away, as if trying to see something hidden in the smoke. And the boy understood. Some tools remembered. Some work carried a weight that the hammer couldn't strike clean again. The ones with cold eyes came most often when war whispered from the edges of the countryside, when rumors moved faster than wagons, when even the church door felt too thin against the wind. They came with fear hidden beneath coin. They came needing something to hold, something sharp, something final. And they left, quieter, not thankful, not cruel, just changed. One day a woman came. She had calloused hands and a bent back, but her voice was clearer than most. She needed nails, a full sack, thick ones, for winter repair. Her eyes were not cold, they were tired. The boy fetched them without being asked, counted them twice, double-checked the sack's tie. When she took them, she looked at him fully, held his gaze, and for a brief moment her mouth twitched upward. Not a smile exactly, but the shadow of one. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. How rare it was to be seen, not as the work, not as the weight, but as someone doing it. He didn't tell his father, but something stayed warm beneath his ribs. Later, much later, when the forge was cold for the night and the tools hung silent on the wall, he stood near the doorway alone. Outside, the village slept. Inside, the anvil waited. He looked at his own reflection in the bucket of water by the quenching trough, and for once the eyes looking back weren't so cold. Let your breath quiet now. Let the noise of the forge fade. Customers have gone. The tools are still, and the only eyes watching now are the ones behind your dreams. Sleep there, ere even the coldest stare softens. It was only a nail. Not a sword, not a hinge, not a sacred relic for a chapel gate. Just a nail, thick square-headed, the kind used to hold wagon boards together, or fix shutters that rattled too hard in the wind. It should have taken seconds. A breath, a blink. One strike, maybe two, but the boy missed the angle. He had watched his father do it hundreds of times. Hold the bar steady on the edge of the anvil, raise the hammer just enough. Not too far, let gravity do the work. Let rhythm shape the head, not force. But this time, his own hammer slipped. Came down too heavy, too quick, too proud, and the nail bent. Not enough to ruin it. Not enough that his father stopped. That was worse than shouting. Worse than anger. Just the sudden stillness. His father looked at it, then at the boy, then at nothing. The hammer was still in his hand. His glove squeaked softly as his fingers tightened around it. The forge crackled faintly as if it too had fallen silent out of respect or fear. The boy's hands felt too large suddenly, his arms too weak. He wanted to step back, to explain, to say he hadn't meant to, but he knew better. Blacksmiths didn't explain. They didn't excuse, they corrected. His father reached out slowly, not fast, not with rage, just with a quiet, tired certainty. He took the boy's hand, the one that had gripped the hammer, and turned it over. The boy didn't pull away. Then came the strike, not with the hammer, not with a fist. Just a flat slap sharp across the palm, strong enough to sting and echo. Not enough to break, just enough to burn. The boy didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. A hot, shocking pain that bloomed up his arm and settled in the back of his throat like smoke swallowed wrong. But he didn't cry. His father let go, turned to the anvil, picked up another bar, said nothing. The boy stood still. His hand throbbed, not from the blow, but from shame. He didn't hate his father. He didn't even fear him, not in the way that children fear monsters or punishment. What he feared was the silence. The way disappointment hung in the air, heavier than smoke. That night, he sat by the wall after supper, his fingers still curled without meaning to. His mother noticed. She didn't ask, just placed a piece of linen in his lap. Clean, folded, soaked faintly in lavender. He didn't use it, just held it there. Let its softness be a thing he could feel, even if he couldn't hold it properly. The next morning, his father handed him another bar. Same size, same weight, a second chance. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the anvil. And this time, the boy breathed slower. Let the hammer lift only halfway. Let it fall like rain, not thunder. Let the iron answer. The nail was straight. Perfect. His father didn't nod, didn't smile, but he moved on. And that was enough. The bent nails stayed on the shelf for weeks. Not thrown away, not melted down. Just there. A reminder. The boy passed it every day. Sometimes he reached out and touched it, just to feel the shape of his own mistake. It was no longer shameful, just real, something that had happened, something that had passed through him. He would make worse mistakes later. But that was the first time he'd learned that the forge didn't care about pride, only shape, only sound, only fire and form. Let your hands rest open now. Let the sting fade. Let the silence speak softer than it did. The nail is straight. The work continues, and your breath, like the hammer, falls gentle again. Sleep with the rhythm of forgiveness. It wasn't the walls that held the story of the forge. Not really. It was the floor. Flat, cold, cracked in places where too much weight had passed over too many years. Stones smoothed down where boots circled the anvil over and over again. Darkened not by shadow, but by the very memory of heat, ash, blood, and sweat that had soaked into the seams. The boy asked once quietly why the floor was always black. It wasn't black like coal, not sharp, not glittering. It was a dull, deep black, like dried ink, or the inside of a barked tree long dead. A black that didn't reflect light, not even the orange shimmer from the forge when the coals were burning high. His father didn't answer right away, just looked down at it, as if remembering something far older than he wanted to speak aloud. Then finally, it stays that way. Because everything that lives here dies a little when it hits the ground. The boy didn't understand, not yet, but he listened. And as the months wore on, he began to see. Everything passed through that floor. Water spilled in haste when the quench bucket tipped. Metal shavings, so fine they shone like glass until they cooled, dulled, and sank into the cracks. Ash, endless ash, floating down in soft gray flakes. Each time the fire exhaled, it clung to everything. The tools, the gloves, the boy's hair, but most of all, the floor. Sometimes it looked like snow had fallen, only to blacken under the weight of something unseen. There were other things, too, once spoken of, but felt. Blood once, when a chisel slipped and took a piece of his father's thumb. His tears. Not his own, but another boy's, years ago, whose name no one said anymore. It's the one who left and never returned. The stones had held that silence tightly ever since. And once, only once, oil spilled from a shattered lamp, its flames snuffed just in time. The smell lingered for days. The black it left behind never faded. The boy swept the floor every night, not because it helped, but because that was the rhythm. The bristles wore thin, and the broom squeaked against stone.
But
He moved it gently, always starting from the forge outward, as though brushing a great animal back into sleep. There were footprints there if you looked closely, not fresh, not full. Just the ghosts of where boots had turned, where feet had hesitated, where someone had stood too long near the heat and left behind more than sweat. The boy began to see the blackness not as dirt, but as memory. The floor was a book no one read, only touched. One corner was darker than the rest, beneath the rack where the long tools hung. That was where mistakes ended up. The boy once found a burned horseshoe there, curled too tight, useless. His father never threw it away, just left it, let the floor keep it. Another spot near the door had grown smoother than the rest. That's where the boy often stood when he wasn't yet allowed inside. Just watching, waiting, rocking gently on his heels, trying to feel the heat from a distance. Now, he stood further in. His own prints joined the rest, began to understand what his father meant. Everything that happened in the forge, the learning, the failing, the burning, the forging, all of it sank downward. All of it left a mark. The floor didn't forget. And maybe. One night, when the fire had gone out and the tools were resting quietly in their places, the boy stood barefoot in the center of the room. The stone was cold, but not unkind. He looked down, saw the smudge where his heel had turned that morning, saw the thin trail of charcoal he hadn't swept completely, saw the shape of the place where his father always paused, just before lifting the hammer, as though the ground itself helped him remember how to begin. The boy knelt, pressed his fingers to the floor. It was rough, gritty, ancient, and warm. In places where no heat should have remained. Let your feet soften now. Let the stone beneath you breathe. The floor is quiet, but it remembers. Let it carry what you no longer need to hold. The black is not darkness, it is memory. And you are part of it now. Some are just voices that learn to rest. Sleep where the silence stays warm. It was only a horseshoe. No gold. No silver. No noble seal stamped into its curve. Just a shoe, forged from iron like all the rest. One of four for a dappled mare that belonged to the reeve, a quiet man with a crooked finger and a face that rarely moved when he spoke. He said little when he brought the old ones in, just held them out, still warm from the animal's hooves, wrapped in a square of wool that smelled of soil and oats. The boy had seen 1,000 horseshoes pass through the forge already. But this time, for reasons not said aloud, his father handed the iron bar to him. The message was clear. No guidance, no demonstration, just the weight of expectation resting across his palm like a challenge carved in cold. So he began. The first bend was too wide. The arch spread open like a bow ready to snap. He reheated it, worked the curve again, letting the metal glow a little longer this time. Still, the curve dipped uneven on the left side, enough to call it ruined, but enough to feel wrong. He tried again. The second shoe twisted in the quench bucket too fast. The hiss echoed too loud, the room growing quiet as the iron warped inward. A ruined shape, soft and puckered, like bread left too long by the fire. His fingers stung. His sleeves smelled of singed wool again. His father said nothing. The hours passed like stones sinking into a stream, slow, quiet, unnoticed until the weight of them built behind the ribs. Midday came and went. The sun barely reached through the high windows, the light only touching the corner of the wall where old stirrups hung like discarded question marks. By the time the third attempt came, his shoulders ached. Not from effort, from restraint. He was no longer forging the shoe. He was trying not to fail it. He brushed the ash from his face with the back of his wrist, smeared it further instead. The forge hummed on. The bellows wheezed with every pull, and the anvil kept its rhythm, though fainter now, waiting for a blow worth ringing for. On the fourth try, he found something different. He held the bar in the flame longer, until it glowed not orange but soft white at the center. He didn't rush. He watched, listened. Let the metal breathe. Let the moment stretch. Then he struck. Once, twice, paused, struck again. The shape held. He flipped it, let gravity lend its hand, adjusted the grip, moved the edge against the horn of the anvil like his father had shown him weeks ago, but never spoken of again. When it was quenched this time, it didn't hiss in anger. It whispered a softer sound. A clean one. He placed it on the wooden bench, beside the others. Looked at it, really looked. It wasn't perfect, but it was right as father. Approached, wiping his hands with a cloth that had seen too many years. He said nothing, only picked up the shoe, turned it twice in his fingers, weighed it like fruit at the market, then set it down. That was all. No nod, no word. Just that small act of returning, and the boy understood. It was accepted. That night, the ache in his arms bloomed like heat stored in old iron. He barely touched his bread, his legs trembling as he carried a pitcher to the basin. But he didn't mind because the shoe had taken all day, and it had been worth it. He knew now why some things couldn't be rushed, why some shapes had to be learned through failure, through bruised palms, through silence and sweat. He slept hard that night. Dremelds. Still, but when he woke, his fingers curled in his sleep as if still holding the hammer, still cradling. The curve let your breath fall quiet now. Let your limbs go. Heavy the shoe is made, the day is done, and the fire remembers every strike you did not sleep in the shape you forged yourself into. It happened just before midnight, not during the day, when the forge blazed bright and the hammers rang like bells. But in the still dark, when the fire had sunk into its coals, and the anvil sat alone in its corner like a great sleeping beast, the boy was in bed, though not yet asleep. The house was quiet, except for the small groans would made when it settled. Under frost, he was listening to the wind tapping at the shutter, that hollow, rhythmic sound like someone knocking softly from far away. Then it came, a crack, deep, low, not sharp like breaking glass, but slow like a bone finally giving beneath too much strain. The boy sat up. At first he thought it was thunder, but the sky had been clear. No rain, no scent of it. Just frost on the eaves and a moon that hung too close. He waited, barely breathing. Another. Creak, a whine. Then stillness. The sound of something old letting go. He crept down the hallway. Barefoot on cold stone, breath barely visible in the air. His mother stirred in sleep behind the curtain. His father hadn't moved. Or perhaps he had, silently. Either way, the boy went alone. The forge was darker than usual. The last of the fire had died without anyone watching. And there, at the center, where the anvil always stood, unmoving, solid, faithful, was a crack. It split down the center of the faceplate. Not wide, not jagged, but deep, clean, like the iron itself had sighed apart. The boy froze. He had never known a forge without that anvil. It had been there before him, before his father, perhaps even before the house. A black block of certainty. It was the forge in many ways. Everything else danced or shifted. The coals, the tools, the men. But the anvil stayed, and now it had broken. He stepped closer, bent low, touched it, still warm, not from fire, from memory. The split had no blood, but it felt like a wound. Not sharp pain, just that dull ache of something ending, something sacred and unspoken, finally giving in to time. His father appeared behind him, silent as always. He didn't ask why the boy was there, didn't ask if he'd seen what had happened. He just stared at it, hands limp at his sides, the firelight from the wall catching on his cheekbone like a scar. He knelt slowly, tracing the crack with one thick finger, then spoke not to the boy, not even to the room. "Thought you'd last longer?" His voice was low, barely above breath. The boy had never heard him speak to a thing before. Not to tools, not to flames, not even to iron. But this was something else. Grief, perhaps, but quieter than grief. He didn't touch the anvil again, just stewed, exhaled once, and left. The boy remained. He looked at the crack, not with fear, with awe. This was what years did. What fire did. What wait and repetition and silence did. Even the strongest thing in the room was at a breaking point. Even iron had an end. The next morning they worked around it. The hammer still struck, but softer now. The rhythm changed. The work slowed. And, in the corner, the old anvil remained useless, but not removed. His father wouldn't let it be taken out. He brought in another one, smaller, not yet blackened by years, not yet humming with memory. It didn't ring the same. It didn't sit right, but the work went on, still. The boy often found himself staring at the crack. He thought about how things hold until they don't. How sometimes they split not from one blow, but from all the ones before it. And he understood this. Was not failure. This was history showing itself quietly. Let your heart slow now. Let the silence hold you. The anvil has cracked, but the forge still breathes. And some breaks. Do not ask to be mended. Sleep beside the weight of things that held on. Longer than they should. Some mornings, the forge smelled different. Not like ash. Not like hot leather or scorched wool, but something thinner. Sharper. The boy knew it the way. Animals know rain. A change in the air before the clouds arrive. A tensing of the ribs. A stillness that wasn't peace. That day, the shavings lay. Thick on the stone. The floor beneath the anvil was littered with curls of blackened iron, twisted thin like the skins of bark peeled from a tree. The kind of waste that came from filing down tools, tiny slivers, sharp enough to catch in cloth, to hide in the hem of a glove, to wait for skin. His father had been shaping a blade. Not for war, not for display, just a plow hook, simple. Work, clean angles, nothing delicate, the kind of task that didn't call for silence. But received it anyway. The boy was oiling the hinge stock when he heard the breath, not loud, just off. A sound like someone biting pain behind their teeth. He turned and saw the red, just a smear at first across the flat of the anvil, then more, pooling in the crook of his father's palm. A long, thin cut, straight across the lifeline. The blade had slipped, or maybe the file had caught. Either way, the shavings had done what iron often does when left too sharp and stepped. Over too many times they bit back. His father didn't curse, didn't cry out. Just watched the blood fall one drop. 2, 3. Each one landing softly in the dust. Turning iron shavings a darker shade of black, the boy froze. Not in fear, but in recognition. He had seen blisters, burns, even a broken toe when the hammer slipped one spring. But blood was different. Blood didn't hiss like fire, it sank quietly, into everything. His father wrapped the hand in silence. A strip of linen pulled from the bench, already stained from other cuts other days. He bound it tight, the fingers rigid, the shape of a fist held too long. Still, the work continued. That was the lesson. The blade was cleaned. The filing swept. Anvil wiped down until the stain faded into memory. But that night, the boy dreamed of red. Not in fear, but in reverence, because he understood. Now truly that the forge didn't just ask for sweat and heat and muscle. It asked for blood, not in sacrifice, but in offering to work in fire, was to give something of the body, to leave pieces behind, tiny ones. At first, skin, breath, time then more, always more. Sometimes a cut, sometimes a scar, sometimes a silence you carry forever. The next morning, his father's hand was stiff. He couldn't grip the hammer the same way, and so, without being asked, the boy stepped forward, took the grip, lifted it, held the weight, not to replace him, just to carry it. For a little while, his father nodded once, and the boy began to strike. Let your thoughts grow still. Let the shavings settle. The wound has closed, the work remains, and the iron remembers softly. Sleep with the memory of what you gave without knowing. That Baron didn't belong in the forge. He came dressed in wool lined with fur, boots to clean, hands wrapped in leather that had never met fire, the kind of man who smelled of pressed herbs and cold wine, and walked as if the stone should shift beneath him to smooth the way. His arrival stirred the village like a stick in broth, slow at first. Then swirling with heat and whisper, he didn't knock. Barons never knocked. He pushed open the door just before the second bell of morning, when the forge had only begun to breathe again. The fire low, the tools still cool, the boy sweeping last night's ash into a corner where it could rest a little longer. His father didn't look up. Not right away. The Baron walked with the quiet of someone used to being heard without sound. Each step placed deliberately, till striking the floor like punctuation. He stopped near the anvil. Too near, he leaned in. One hand resting on the edge of the work table, eyes tracing the soot patterns along the wall, the dark veins where heat had written its history into the stone. I need a blade, he said at last. Not a question, not even a command. Just the shape of decision. It's already made. The blacksmith didn't respond right away. He kept shaping the hinge he'd been working on, slow, deliberate bends. The kind that didn't need fire, just patience and a steady hand. The boy held his breath. Even the bellows seemed to wait. After a moment, his father set the hinge down, then looked up. Not with reverence, not with fear, just stillness. What kind? The Baron raised an eyebrow. The silence between them thickened. Then he reached inside his cloak and unwrapped a bundle of cloth, heavy, dark, stiff with oil. From within it, he drew a blade, not broken, but dulled, nicked at the edge, stained with something the boy couldn't name. Not blood, not rust, just history. I want it reforged, the Baron said. Made new, stronger. His father didn't touch it, didn't take it in hand, just looked at it then at the man. Reforging takes time, he said simply. The Baron stepped. Closer, too close. Close enough that his breath touched the rim of the anvil. Close enough that his boots stood where no boots but the smith's had ever stood. Close enough that the fire seemed to lean back. I'm not paying for time, he said, voice low. I'm paying for silence. The boy didn't understand what that meant, not fully, but he saw the way his father's eyes changed just a flicker, like an ember catching something it didn't want to burn. Still, Blacksmith nodded, took the blade, carried it to the hearth, held it in the fire, just long enough to feel its memory, then set it aside. The Baron left with no further word, but the weight of him lingered. That night the blade sat on the anvil, untouched, not cooling, not waiting, just there, a presence, and the boy watched. He stared at it long after the forge had dimmed, long after his father's boots had stilled, long after the rest of the world slept. There was something in it, not magic, not mystery, just something that had seen more than it should. Have yacht and wanted to forget. When his father finally forged it, days later, he worked without rhythm, without sound. Each strike quieter than the last. The boy never saw the blade again, but the space it left behind never filled. Sometimes, fire remembers what hands try to forget. Let the shadows soften now. Let the silence stretch wide. The Baron is gone. The blade is done. And the forge does not speak of what it shaped. Sleep where secrets are left to cool. It was just before harvest. The air had turned, not yet cold, but not summer anymore. The kind of weather that made your sleeves feel too short in the morning and too warm by noon. The boy had been helping load cart axles for the thatcher when the stranger came. Not a noble, not a soldier, just a traveler. Though the wear in his boots said war more than wandering. He carried a sword, wrapped in waxed cloth and twine. It's like someone had tried to hold its pieces together long after it had failed. The blade had cracked down the middle. Not clean, not sudden. It had split over. Time, slowly, like frost and stone. Until one morning, it no longer held. He asked if it could be saved. His father didn't answer right away. He took the cloth, unwrapped it on the anvil, and ran his fingers along the fracture, slow, careful, like reading a wound. Then he looked at the man, eyes not cruel, just honest. No, the words sat in the room like a weight. Not sharp, not loud, just final. The traveler didn't argue. He only nodded, and asked if it could be melted down, turned into something else, a hinge. Maybe a spade, a nail. That request made the blacksmith pause. Melted metal was different. It had memory, some. Pieces fought their new shape. Others surrendered easily. The boy had seen both. He watched as his father carried the broken sword to the forge, laid it carefully on the bricks beside the coals, not in them. Not yet. It rested there all afternoon. No work was done, no customers. Where seen, the sword simply waited. As the sun lowered behind the roofline, his father finally lit the fire. The boy pulled the bellows slowly, hands tight from the chill, face still sticky with ash from sweeping. The forge yawned open with light, and the blade began to glow. It groaned as it heated. Some iron sang when it melted. This one mourned when it was soft enough. The hammer didn't strike. It pressed, slow, measured, the way a hand might close the eyes of someone gone. Each fold of the metal shrank it further. Each quench made the room quieter, until finally it was nothing but a block again, blank shape, an echo of what it once had been. The boy never asked what it would become. But the next morning, his father left it on the bench with the rest of the stock. No label, no claim. Just waiting for a new purpose. The traveler didn't come back, but someone else, weeks later, asked for a draw knife. For woodwork, and the steel cut clean, the boy knew it, had come from the sword, not from its shape, but from the way it handled the grain. Gentle, patient. Like it no longer needed to fight. The forge gives many things. Form, heat, edge. But most of all, it gives cost. The price of failure. The toll of change. The silence after something breaks. It keeps living anyway. That sword hadn't shattered. In war it had cracked in peace. Under rest. Under time. And the cost of its reforging was forgetting what it used to be. Let your heart quiet. Now let the edge soften. Not all breaks are loud. Some come in stillness, and some metal sleeps. Easier once it forgets the shape it once held. Sleep in the slow fire of beginning again. It came earlier than anyone expected. The cold, sharp and sudden. Without the usual soft rains to ease the village from autumn to frost. One night they went to sleep with the smell of apples still hanging in the yard. The next, the world was silent beneath snow that arrived like a warning too late to be heard. And that year, there was no charcoal, or not enough. The last delivery came mid-harvest, the cart piled low, the man behind the reins apologizing before the wheels had even stilled. The hills had been too wet, he said. Trees had soaked too deep. The fires wouldn't catch right. What little he brought was already promised to the larger town eastward. The forge would get what was left, a few sacks, not more. The blacksmith said nothing. He only looked at the bags, 2, maybe 3, and nodded. The boy knew what that meant. Weeks, perhaps maybe less. Charcoal was the forge's blood. Without it, the fire didn't burn hot enough. The iron wouldn't soften. Hammer would meet stubborn, cold shapes and bounce away. Empty work would stop. The world would wait. They rationed. No bellows in the morning, no unnecessary heating. The fire, once constant and comforting, was kept low. Coals banked like coins too precious to spend all at once. Each morning, the boy would check the bin, run his fingers through the black dust, hoping some part of it had deepened overnight, had become more, but it never had. And every time the forge breathed, it aged. On the 4th morning, his father refused a customer. Not cruelly, just with a soft shake of the head and a hand held up before a word could be finished. The man left with a broken rake and the look of someone who would speak poorly of them at the next gathering. But that didn't matter. The fire had to be fed with care now. The boy learned to listen closer, to hear how the charcoal whispered. When it was close to failing, a low hiss, a sluggish glow, no dance, just tired warmth. Evenings grew darker earlier. They worked less, slept more. Ate meals beside a hearth that flickered weakly, as if embarrassed by its own smallness. And still, the snow fell. One day the forge didn't light at all, not from choice. There simply wasn't enough left. The bin was empty. His father didn't speak. He walked the perimeter of the smithy, as he sometimes did when measuring quiet, as if listening for something beneath the floor that might wake and tell him what to do next. Then he sat down and stayed there. The boy stood beside the anvil, hands cold even in his sleeves, and stared into the empty hearth. It looked smaller now, more like a wound than a tool that night. It didn't cook. Just ate bread, hard from the edge of the oven, dipped in what was left of the root cellar broth. The house felt hollow, but not hopeless, just quiet, as if the forge itself had gone to sleep, waiting like a tired dog beneath the bed for spring to call it back. In the days that followed, the boy gathered what he could: twigs, bark, even dried dung. From the mule pen, anything that might burn without needing too much. They lit those scraps once or twice. Just enough to heat water, just enough to keep the tools from rusting in the wet air. And slowly, the fire forgave them. It didn't rage, didn't roar, but it stayed alive. Barely when the charcoal finally returned late, thin, only half what had been promised, the boy ran his fingers through the new sack as if touching silk. He didn't tell his father right away. He just sat near it, letting the scent of pine smoke and earth rest in his lungs. That evening, they lit the forge again, and it didn't protest. It caught, it breathed, it remembered, and for the first time in weeks, the anvil sang once more. Let the chill leave your bones now. Let the fire return to your chest. It has waited for you. The charcoal is back, and with it, the shape of warmth. Sleep in the glow of what you never let go cold. It started as a small mark, nothing unusual. Not on a forge where skin met flame every day, where blisters were more common than words, where hands thickened with callus before they ever learned grace. The boy had touched the wrong part of the tongs, not the handle, but the shaft near, the joint where heat traveled faster than the mind could remember. Just a moment. A blink, the iron hissed against his skin. He drew back too late. The pain was sharp at first, then hot, then slow. Like something burrowed beneath the surface and waited. He said nothing, not because he wanted to be brave, but because pain was part of the work. You didn't complain. You didn't flinch. You waited for it to pass. But this one didn't. Days passed. The mark darkened, blistered, then split. The skin around it stayed red, soft, angry. When he touched it at night, it pulsed like it had its own breath, like it wanted to speak. His mother noticed first. She said nothing, but her hands paused longer. At the sleeve, when she washed his arms, she pressed her thumb gently beside the wound. Not on it, just near. The boy winced. She looked at him then. He looked away. That night she crushed herbs into cloth yarrow, comfrey a touch of honey. Though it was dear, she bound the burn tightly, didn't resist. The next morning the cloth was stained, and the burn still hurt. The forge waited. Work did not pause. His father did, not asked, only watched. And the boy learned something new, that when a wound lingers, the world doesn't slow to match it. You learn to carry the fire inside you, even when it bites. The days turned colder. He struggled to grip the hammer some mornings, not from weakness, but from fear the skin would tear. Sometimes he wrapped the hand in a strip of hide. Sometimes he gritted his teeth and kept striking. The fire did not care. It welcomed him all the same. But at night, when the world finally stilled and the coals dimmed low, he would sit beside the hearth and stare at his hand. It had changed. The skin there would never return. It shone faintly now, even in the dark. Not soft, not smooth, just different. A place where the forge had touched too deep and refused to leave. The burn didn't heal the way it should have. It stayed. Some days it was quiet, other days ached before rain. But over time, he stopped waiting for it to go. He let it be part of him, not a flaw, not a weakness. Just one more shape the fire had chosen. Years later, when he taught another how to grip the tongs, he didn't point to the mark. He didn't need to. It spoke for itself. A reminder. A story with no words. That even pain, when carried long enough, becomes its own kind of strength. Let your hands rest. Now let the ache soften. The fire remembers, and so do you. But there is no pain. Tonight only warmth, only stillness, only the slow healing of breath. Sleep where no wound can reach. There were nights when the boy couldn't bear the glow. Not from pain. Not from fear, just from fullness. When the forge had taken too much, when the heat had curled into his bones, even long after the fire had died. When the smell of smoke seemed to cling to his lungs more than his clothes, when his dreams refused. Too cool he would lie there, stiff on the straw bed, the blanket too rough, too warm, and stare at the ceiling, watching the shadows stretch and shrink with each breath of wind against the shutters. And in those moments, he dreamed of water, not in sleep, but in longing. Still ponds, deep wells, rain slipping from thatch to earth, cold buckets lowered into darkness and drawn back up with ropes frayed from time. He dreamed of a stream that ran behind the forge, though none had ever existed. Soft trickling, moss on stone, sunlight flickering through trees that never grew in their yard. He imagined dipping his arms in it, letting the blackened skin soak until it softened, letting the sound of the current carry away the throb in his elbows, the pinch. In his neck he imagined the water smelling not of iron, but of mint and bark and clean. Forgotten things. There was a part of him young still that wished the forge would go. Quiet for good. Not from hate, not from rebellion, just from exhaustion to wake one morning and find the hearth cold, not because they lacked fuel, but because the fire had chosen rest. To find his father sitting with a bowl of broth instead of tongs. To find no metal waiting on the bench, of soot, rising to stain the window panes, just silence, just breath, just a day without shaping. Of course, he would never say this, not aloud, not even to himself, but the water, and vanished into cloth in the taste of his own tongue when he hadn't drunk enough. Some days, When the forge was quiet, a rare hour when no carts rolled in and no tools were broken, he would walk to the village's edge. To the old well, he wouldn't lower a bucket. He would just sit on the stone rim, his fingers resting on the moss, and breathe. Sometimes, imagine climbing down into it. Not to hide, not to flee, but to listen, to hear the water echo, to feel the coldness rise, to remember what life felt like without fire. His father once found him there, didn't scold, didn't question, just sat beside him and said, "That was all then, they?" Walked home together, neither spoke of it again, but the boy felt something loose in that. Day not disappear, just ease, because now he knew his father dreamed of water. 2. Let the heat leave you now, let the coolness return. You've carried the forge long enough. Tonight, you float. Tonight, you drift. Sleep beside the well that waits behind your eyes. It didn't happen all. At once, no single moment, no accident, no loud sound in the forge that marked an ending, just slow STILing. It began in the mornings, the way his fingers curled a little tighter during sleep and were slow to uncurl, the way his knuckles cracked more than they used to, each sound sharper, more final, the way the hammer took longer to lift, not because it was heavier, but because he was. The boy noticed first, not with alarm, just a quiet awareness, like how one notices the first frost in the corners of the roof, or the way the sun rises just a breath later in autumn. His father's grip slipped more often. His swing, once precise, now landed a breath too late. Tools were dropped. Tongs rattled against stone, and the rhythm changed. The forge still burned, the bellows still breathed, but the man behind the anvil had begun to fade. There was no complaint, only adjustments. His father stopped working the large orders. No more wagon axles, no more gate bars. He passed them off to others, to the younger smith down the hill, or to tradesmen in neighboring villages. Instead, he shaped the small things, hooks, rivets, simple locks. Quiet work, steady work, the kind that asked more of patience than strength. But even those began to resist him. One evening, the boy watched him try to twist a hinge, small, delicate, a piece he could have shaped in his sleep. Years ago, and it slipped. The tool clattered to the floor. His hand followed. He knelt for longer than needed, then rose, slowly, silent. The boy didn't speak. He only stepped forward, picked up the tool, and laid it gently on the bench. That night, his father sat by the forge long after the fire had faded. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the coals darken the next day. He did not take up the hammer. He passed it to the boy. No words. No ceremony, just a slow, quiet handoff. But they knew the grip. They knew the rhythm. They had learned. Not by being told, but by watching, repeating, failing, and rising again. His father stepped back, folded his arms, and watched, and for the first time, did nothing. The forge accepted the change without protest. It burned the same. It waited the same. But now, it listened to different hands, and they answered. That night, the boy sat beside the cold anvil, his fingers sore, the smell of iron still. Caught beneath his nails, his father sat nearby, hands resting on his knees. Still, but not idle, just done. There was sadness. Yes, but not regret. Because hands are not forever, but the work is, the warmth is, the passing down. It's let your hands loosen now. Let the hammer rest beside you. You have taken enough weight for one night. Sleep. In the quiet, where strength begins to soften, he wasn't really a boy anymore. Not after that winter. Not after the day his father's fingers stilled mid-swing and never quite found their way back. Not after the first morning he rose before the sun and lit the forge himself, without waiting, without asking, without needing permission. That would never come. But still, the village called him the boy, the smith's boy, quiet one, the one. With the dark eyes and the burn mark on his hand that hadn't faded, only deepened, like the fire had claimed him once and for all, and left its signature behind. They brought him their tools, same as before. Not with doubt. Not with ceremony. Just the quiet expectation that the work would be done, that hinges would swing, that horses would not limp, that their world, fragile and weather-worn, would hold together just a little longer because someone stood at the anvil. He was slower at first, not from uncertainty, but from care. He measured twice, sometimes 3 times, heated the iron in silence, struck without flourish, without waste. The rhythm was not his father's. It was something new. A beat steadier, lower, more thoughtful. He spoke less now, not from shyness, but because the forge had taught him language. Without words, the smell of hot metal, the tone of a file, cross iron, the pause before a hammer drops, those were his words, those were his. Prayers, the villagers noticed, they brought more work, not just repairs, but requests, new shapes, ideas, things they'd never asked for before, eh? Lantern bracket carved with ivy, a door latch that didn't rattle in the wind, a child's toy, shaped like a bird, delicate and smooth, made from leftover shavings and a piece of scrap bronze. He made them all, because the forge now, sfuta, was his, and though his father still sat near the hearth most mornings, a mug of broth in his hands, his shoulders wrapped in a blanket that once belonged to the apprentice who never returned, he said little. He only watched and nodded. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And that was enough. The boy, now man, though no one called him that yet, cleaned the tools each night with a patience he'd never needed before. He lined them on the bench by size. He oiled the tongs. He sharpened the chisels, even the ones no longer used, as if the act of care itself was part of the fire. And before he banked the coals to sleep, he always touched the hammer, the one his father had, passed down without words, not to lift it again, just to feel its weight, to remember the heat it held, to remember the long days before it had ever fit his hand. Let your breath be slow now. Let. The fire dim low, the hammer is resting, the boy holds it now, and tomorrow. It will sing again, sleep in the quiet between what was given and what must be carried. It arrived wrapped in burlap, tied with twine the color of mud. The man who brought it was old, older than iron should allow, his spine bent like a bow left too long unstrung. He didn't wear boots fit for snow, just leather shoes cracked at the toe, soles flapping with every step. He didn't speak, just set the bundle on the bench, pressed 1 coin beside it, and waited. The boy, now the blacksmith, watched his eyes. Not sharp, not soft, just distant, like he'd seen something far behind the room and never quite returned. He opened the cloth carefully, and there it was. A breastplate, dull, cracked along the edge where a blade must have struck too close. It was pitted, with rust, stained with streaks the color of dried blood and old rain. A long gouge ran from collar to rib, like the memory of a blow that had nearly split its wearer in half. It wasn't a soldier's armor. Not anymore, it was history. The old man's, most likely, or someone he once followed or buried, forgot, and then remembered again too late. The blacksmith ran his fingers over it, the rust flaked gently. Beneath his thumb, the center bulged, and slightly, not from a blow, but from time. Metal doesn't just die, it bends first, it weakens. It gives in to quiet things like weather and breath, and waiting too long to be touched. The boy, no longer a boy, asked what he wanted done, but the old man only looked away, so he hung it. Not on a rack, not in the scrap, on the far wall. Light barely reached, a place where breath cooled in winter, and even the fire's glow faded to amber. He nailed it to the beam with care, not force. 1 iron spike through each shoulder strap. No polish, no shine. Just presence, and it hung there, silent, heavy like a forgotten word. No one dared speak aloud. Every time he turned from the forge, it was there, watching, not judging, not warning, just there. Days passed. The armor didn't move, but others noticed. Some asked if he could restore it. He shook his head, said it was done, said it had earned its rust. Others didn't ask. They only stared a little longer than usual when paying for new bridle rings or hook clasps. Their eyes didn't rest on the hammer or the heat, but on that breastplate, dull and dark, shadowed with memory. The blacksmith never touched it again, but he felt it every time he lifted the hammer, every time a sword edge sang too loud, every time a nail bent wrong and reminded him of his own first wound. Some iron is not meant to return. Some scars don't want reshaping. Some armor hangs not. For pride? But as apology, the old man never came back. But his silence stayed, and in time, the blacksmith began to understand. The forge didn't just build, it remembered. It held. Even the things too broken to fix. Even the things that asked for nothing. What? A place to rest. Let your shoulders soften now. Let the armor stay. It's on the wall. It won't fall. It won't fade. It has already done enough. Sleep in the hush of what no longer needs to be mended. The cold that year came in early, like a guest arriving. Before the table had been set, the mornings bit deeper. Even the coals, well stoked and watched, took longer to catch. The tools held the frost longer in their metal bellies, and the walls of the forge creaked with every shift in wind, like they were trying to pull themselves inward for warmth. And on one of those mornings, gray, windless, and still, the blacksmith's hands began to shake, not from fear, not from age, not from any single cause that he could name, just shaking. A tremble in the fingers, out. A stutter in the wrist. A small, quiet betrayal that the hammer noticed even before he did. He tried to hold steady, tried to grip the blade stock just like always, angle it, tap once, tap twice, strike with care. But the rhythm faltered. The weight of the hammer swung different. It fell with a crooked ring, like a bell cracked too close to the base. He stopped, set the hammer down gently, looked at his hands. They didn't still. He stepped back, slow, as if not to startle his own limbs, and the fire so faithful continued. Burning without question, the boy, now nearly a man in truth and in trade, watched from across the room. He had been filing down a bolt, smoothing out the grooves. He paused, but he didn't speak. He only waited. The blacksmith sat, not like someone resting, but like someone surrendering. Not to weakness, but to truth. The forge was full of those. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just that moment, those hands. That quiet. Later his son came to him not to ask, not to console, just to offer a warm cloth soaked in the steeped leaves his mother had once used when pain hid too deep to reach with fingers. He wrapped his father's hands in it, sat beside him. Neither of them looked at the fire. It was still early in the day, still time left, but no more work was done. The next morning, the older man didn't go to the forge. He sat in the doorway instead, wrapped in a wool cloak the color of old stone, a mug cradled between hands that still trembled, though less, and he watched the shape of his son lifting the hammer. Watched the angle, the movement, the care. It's no longer practice, not anymore. It was his own rhythm now, different, but sure. That day, the blacksmith did not hold iron, but he held something heavier. The knowledge that the forge, his forge, would go on. Not in the tools, not in the fire, but in the hands that could still strike true. The shaking didn't stop, but the world didn't end. The fire still glowed, the walls still stood, and the work continued. Let your breath quiet now. Let the weight leave your fingers. Some days, the body forgets how to hold. That's all right. Let the forge remember for you. Sleep in the steadiness that waits when your hands are still. That winter, the woodpile froze not just cold, frozen, solid, bound to the earth by ice that crept in under the cover of night, crawled up through the dirt, held the logs in place like a fist closing around its own knuckles. The boy no longer quite boy. Not yet, master. Found it before first light. He'd stepped outside before the bell, the air still thick with stars and silence, breath rising in puffs that drifted toward the old chimney and vanished. The ground crackled underfoot, his boots slipped once, then again, but he reached the woodpile, gloved hands ready, and found it unmoving. The logs would not lift. They clung to the ground, locked together by frost-like ribs held tight against the cold. He pulled, tugged, kicked gently at the base. Nothing gave behind him. The forge was still dark. The coals had gone to sleep early the night before, banking. Only what little heat the dying embers could carry through to morning. They needed wood. Dry, clean-burning wood. Not this. The blacksmith came to the doorway then. No hammer in hand, just a wool shawl over his shoulders, wrapped twice around his neck. His hair had gone almost white at the sides. The cold made him look carved from stone. He didn't speak, just watched his son struggle with the wood, and then turned. Away, not in disappointment, but in trust. The boy would solve it, and he did. Slowly, one log at a time, not pulled, warmed. He built a small fire by the corner of the pile, not from firewood, but from straw, splinters, shavings. He kept it low, just enough to bleed warmth into the edge of the stack. Crouched near it, breath close to flame, coaxing it gently, beating it as if it were a bird too frightened to fly. And hour by hour, the frost let go. It didn't crack or shatter. It melted softly, as though even the cold could learn to loosen. By mid-morning, he'd freed enough to begin. The fire in the forge caught on the third. Not breath from the bellows. It rose slow. But it rose. And when the first tool was shaped that day, a shovel blade for the widow down the road, it sang bright and clear against the anvil. The sound sharper than it had been in weeks. The boy looked at his hands. Soot dash-streaked, cracked at the knuckles. Still warm, and he understood. Something new. Sometimes the work was not in the striking, but in the waiting, in knowing when not to force the fire, in knowing how to thaw what's bound. Later that evening, his father placed a log by the hearth inside the house, not for burning, but for keeping. A dark knot of oak, once frozen stiff, now dry and split slightly at the edge, as if sighing in relief. He didn't say why, but the boy knew. It was a reminder that not all things break when frozen. Some things just need time. Let your breath fall slow now. Let the cold pass through you and leave nothing behind. The logs are free, the forge is warm, and the day has already been won. Sleep in the quiet after frost. It's loosed its grip. It happened only once, the kind of moment so strange, so quiet, so unlike the rhythm of every other day that had hung in memory, the way smoke hangs in rafters, long after it's gone. Long after the fire has died, the forge spoke, not in words, not in voices, but in sound. Intones the boy now. A man could not place. The fire hissed in a way it never had. Not angry, not wild, just different. A kind of humming, like metal, remembering a name it had not heard in years. It was twilight, a strange stretch between labor and rest. When the day turns its head but doesn't yet close its eyes, he had been working alone, filing down a hook, meant for the chapel gate. Simple work, quiet, no rush, no wind. And then it began. The coals shifted, no bellows pulled, no wind moved through the door. But the flames rose just slightly, not brighter, not hotter, it's taller, as though reaching for something beyond the flue. And then came the sound, a low tone, a note. Almost it moved from the base of the hearth, curled through the space beneath. The anvil rose past the racks, brushed his ribs, not like breath, not like heat, but like remembrance. He froze, the file still in his hand. The forge hummed. He stepped back, slowly, unsure if what he heard was from the fire. It wasn't frightening. It was just impossible, like watching a stone breathe. He looked to the door. His father hadn't entered. No wind. No birds, nothing. Just him, just the forge, and that sound. It rose for a few more seconds, no longer than a deep breath, then faded, back into the heart of the coals like a secret not meant to be spoken. Silence returned, but not the Same kind as before. Something had passed through. He didn't speak of it. Not to his father. Not to the visitors who came that week for new hinges, new wheels, new rails for fencing. But he watched the fire more closely after that, waited for it. To speak again? It never did, at least. Not like that, but he heard echoes. The sound of the anvil catching a strike, just slightly off-center. Ringing with a note that didn't belong, the shape of flame curling sideways when no wind touched it. The quiet hiss of a tool cooling too fast. Sounding like breath drawn sharply between teeth, he began to understand what the old men meant when they said the forge listened. He now knew. It could speak not in the way people speak, but in the old way, the deep way, the language of metal and memory and patience. He wasn't afraid. He just paid attention. Because when a place that's been silent for a lifetime sings, you don't question it. You remember it. You listen harder, and you strike more carefully. Let your mind rest now. Let the fire fall quiet. It spoke once. That is enough sleep. In the hush that follows something sacred, there had always been a bell above the smithy. Door small, plain darkened by soot and years of silence. It wasn't there for beauty. It wasn't there for guests. It was meant to chime when the door opened. To let the blacksmith know someone had arrived. A farmer with a broken plow tooth. Tanner with buckles gone soft. A child with a wagon wheel pulled wrong on a stone path. But it rarely rang. Its rope had frayed. Its clapper had gone dull. The boy remembered it only faintly from childhood, the way it used to chime when his father passed through each morning. Still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, boots scuffing against frost-covered stone, and now it hung crooked. The rope had snapped in autumn. It dangled awkwardly now, little to the left, casting a thin shadow in the morning light that curved just slightly against the wall like a bent finger. The blacksmith still young, but older than he had ever imagined. Finally decided to fix it, not out of pride, but because there was something sacred in finishing the quiet work. The things no one asked for. The things that told you a place was still breathing. He took it down gently. It was colder than he expected. The rust flaked onto his hands, tiny orange-brown crumbs that melted into his fingerprints. The clapper inside had a chip along the side, a scar, just like the one on his own hand, the burn that never faded, the mark that kept him honest. He cleaned it carefully, polished it with vinegar and ash, not to make it shine, but to wake it. The first time he tested it, a small tap with the side of his hammer, it gave a sound that wasn't quite right. Too sharp, too fast. It rang, yes, but not in the way he remembered. It sounded like memory chipped, like grief, if it had teeth. He frowned, tapped it again. Still wrong. He considered shaping a new one, better metal, cleaner shape, a bell that would ring true, but he stopped. Because what he wanted wasn't a perfect bell. It was that. Crooked, rusted, faint. The sound it made might not have been clean, but it belonged. And so he rehung it. Not straight. He let it lean, just as it always had. Tied the new rope through the worn eyelet, adjusted it only once, then he stepped back, opened the door, the bell. Rang soft, uneven, perfect. He stood there for a moment, longer than needed, then returned to the forge, and worked with the sound of it still echoing behind his ribs. The next morning, a customer came. The bell rang again, the old sound, bent and beautiful, and the forge welcomed him. Not with fanfare, just with memory. Let your breath fall into rhythm now. Let crooked things remain. Not all songs ring.
True.
Some just ring honestly sleep. Beneath the sound of something bent into its rightful place. He came in early autumn, barely taller than the anvil itself, shoes too thin, eyes too wide, hair the color of wheat left too long in the sun. He stood just outside the forge, on the stones near the woodpile. Didn't move for a long time. Didn't ask, didn't call out, just watched the blacksmith. Saw him through the shimmer of heat, rising from the coals, a small shape against the pale morning light. At first he thought the boy was lost, or shy, or waiting for an older voice to speak for him. But he returned the next day and the day after that, and still. No words. The blacksmith didn't press. He had no patience for children who talked. Too much who wanted stories instead of heat, who played with nails like they were toys. But this one didn't speak. He watched carefully from the same place, just beyond the doorway, hands folded. Barely breathing, after a week, the blacksmith placed a small bench beside the door. Didn't say why, didn't gesture. Just left it there the next morning. The boy sat closer now, still silent. But his eyes followed everything. The angle of the tongs, the turn of the wrists before a strike, the small flex of the bellows rope. His gaze moved with the rhythm of the forge, like he already knew what would come next. The blacksmith remembered that feeling. How he had watched his father from just beyond the edge of firelight, afraid to blink, afraid to ask. Just wanting to be near the heat without disturbing it, he let the boy stay. Days passed, then weeks. Still no words, but the boy brought things. Quiet offerings. One morning, a bundle of kindling tied with string. Another, a handful of nails that had fallen from the wagon path, rusted and soft. Once, he placed a piece of broken pottery near the hearth. A blue shard, the curve of something that once held oil. No note, no explanation, just a piece of something once useful. Now waiting for memory, the blacksmith began to nod to him, just once. Each morning, and the boy always nodded back. The first time the boy stepped inside the forge, it was raining. Not hard, just steady. Kind of rain that seeps into stone and makes the fire hiss at the edges. He didn't ask. He just crossed the threshold, one slow foot after another, and stood near the back wall, far from the heat. The forge didn't protest. Neither did the man. He let him watch from closer now, taught nothing, but allowed everything to be seen. The way metal softened just before it surrendered. The way hands must know the weight of the hammer, forever lifting it. The way silence was not a space between words, but the language of the forge itself. Still, the boy said nothing, but his breath matched the bellows by the second week, and the blacksmith knew this boy would strike his first iron before spring. He didn't need to speak. He only needed to remember. Let your breath grow quiet now. Let your thoughts step just inside the doorway. You do not need to ask. The forge sees you. The warmth is already reaching sleep. Watcher, you are welcome here. It was late in the year when the order came. Not unusual a blade. Yes, but not for battle. Not for ceremony. Just a working knife. Modest, unadorned. A tool, not a treasure. The kind that would spend its days slicing rope, trimming wood, living hard in a belt loop rather than displayed above a hearth. But something in the way the man asked for it stayed with the blacksmith. He'd been older than most, with a limp in his left leg and a coat stitched too many times to count. He hadn't asked for speed, just strength. Said he had land farther north and needed something that wouldn't dull in a month's time. The blacksmith promised he'd forge it himself. He didn't say why, not to the man, not to the boy. Now apprentice, now growing into the silence of the forge, not even to himself, but something stirred in him as he prepared for it. A vague feeling he couldn't name. The fire that day burned clear, not tall, not loud, just true. He lit it before first light, let it warm slow, let the bellows rest between breaths. He laid out his tools with care, the hammer he trusted, the quench bucket cleaned the night before, the whetstone his father had smoothed down with decades of use. And when the metal was ready, hot, bright, pulsing like something half alive, he began. There was no haste. Each strike came like a memory. The ring of the anvil no longer startled birds. It sounded softer now, rounder, like it echoed through time instead of space. The apprentice didn't speak. He stood by the wall, just like the boy he once was, and watched. He didn't offer help, didn't move. He understood this was not a lesson. This was something else. The blade took shape like it had always waited for this moment. Not large, not elegant, but balanced, precise, honest. When it came time to quench, the blacksmith paused, held the blade above the water just a moment longer, watched it steam, watched it breathe. Then he lowered it in a hiss. A long, slow sigh. Steam rose into the rafters, and the forge, for that breath of time, went silent. When the blade cooled, he set it gently on the bench, ran a cloth across the edge. Not polishing, just holding, like it might speak. It didn't, but it felt like it might. That evening, he wrapped it in cloth, tied with cord, and set it beside the door. He didn't wait for thanks. Didn't even wait. For it to be collected, he simply looked at it one last time, nodded. The apprentice brought him tea. They sat near the coals, no work left to finish, no words left to say. That night, the blacksmith didn't sleep in the bed. He stayed near the forge, back against the wall, blanket pulled across his knees. Eyes half closed, hands quiet, and the blade, his last, waited in silence beside the hearth. Cooling completely, let your heart be still now. Let the fire flicker low. The last blade has been shaped. There is no rush, no fear, only the warmth of something finished. Sleep. In the hush of work well done, the forge was cold that morning. Not from lack of fuel, not from carelessness, simply because it had chosen to rest. The apprentice, now nearly grown, strong of shoulder, soft of step, woke before light, as he always did. He stirred the embers, expecting the usual faint glow, the warm breath of waiting coals. But they were ash, still pale as bone. He didn't relight it, not yet. Instead, he listened. The room held a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of quiet so deep it rang in the ribs, like standing alone in a chapel where someone has just finished a prayer. The hammer still sat on the bench, its head dark with use, its handle worn smooth where generations of hands had held it. But no one picked it up. Not that day. The blacksmith, his master. His father in craft, if not in name, was not in the forge. He was in the house, sleeping longer than usual. His breath still steady, chest rising beneath thick wool, but his hands no longer curled around the idea of work. They rested flat, open, as though offering something back to the world without. It's asking for anything in return. The apprentice lit a single candle in the SMITH. Not for heat. For memory, its glow caught the edges of things' nail heads, old hooks, the dulled curve of a knife that had once been a sword. He swept the floor. Not quickly, not too tidy, just to honor. Each stroke of the broom stirred little clouds of ash that floated in the still air and then settled again, like dust bowing down to what had passed. There was no ring of iron that day, no hiss of steam, no chorus of strikes, only breath, only light, only the sound of wind moving across the shutters slow, like someone pacing outside with nowhere else to be. Later, the sun found the edge of the forge through the high window. The apprentice stepped outside, just briefly. The light was cold on his skin. The yard was still. The bell above the door didn't ring. He turned back and paused. The hammer was still there, exactly where it had been left, but now it seemed to glow faintly, not from heat, not from polish, but from rest. It had sung for decades. It had shaped blades, horseshoes, hinges, locks, gates, hope, memory. It had carried the weight of a life. Now it waited, and in that waiting was peace. The apprentice didn't touch it. He nodded once, then returned to the house and sat in silence. Beside the man who had shown him how to hold fire in his hands without burning, let your breath fall quiet, and let your limbs go still. The hammer has been set down. The forge is full of sleep, and there is nothing left to shape tonight. Only rest, only warmth, only the hush after the last sound fades. Sleep in the quiet where the final whir, low still echoes. It had never been locked, not once, not in all the years the boy could remember, not when he was small and afraid of the dark shapes the tongs cast. On the wall, Not during storms that sent the shutters rattling like bones. Not even during the famine year when carts vanished from the road and dogs went missing. The forge door had always stayed open, even in sleep, even in silence, even when the fire had been banked low. It waited, sometimes half open, sometimes shut against the wind, but never sealed, never forbidden. Until that day, the morning came gray, thick with low clouds that didn't break, as though the sky itself had forgotten how to rise. Ah, the apprentice, now a man. Now the one whose name was spoken when iron failed or would split woke. Early, same as always, but something was different. The air had that stillness again. The same one from the night the blade had been quenched for the last time. The same hush that had settled when the hammer had been laid down and not lifted again. He walked down the hallway, barefoot, slow. When he reached the forge, he paused. The door was closed, but not just closed. The latch was down. The bolts set the iron bar across the inside. One only used in storms or sickness had been drawn tight. He stood there a long time, not afraid, just aware of what it did. Meant when a place like that chose stillness, he didn't try to open it, didn't knock. He only rested his palm against the wood warm from the sun that had just begun to stretch across the yard. He closed his eyes. Let the memory of heat reach his fingertips. Let the silence tell him what he already knew. Inside, the coals were cold, the bench untouched, the hammer resting in its place, never again to rise. And somewhere in the back room of the house, the man who had been blacksmith to a village, to a lifetime, to a child who had once bent a nail and been forgiven for it, had exhaled his final breath. Not loudly, not with fear, but with the same quiet he had always carried into the forge, the same rhythm, the same weight. The apprentice. No longer apprentice did not cry. He did not speak. He did not need to. He walked to the old stump where the wheel spokes were split and sat, hands loose in his lap, boots still damp with dew. He waited there all day and into the night, long after the village noticed, long after word moved like wind through the crooked streets. Some came, some stood far off, hats in hand. Some placed tools gently on the ground beside the path, not as offerings, as thanks. The forge door stayed shut, not locked against the world, but sealed in rest, the kind of rest only earned after a life lived beside fire, beneath weight, through silence, the kind of rest that doesn't end in sleep, just deepens into it. Let your eyes close, and let the door stay closed. You have seen enough. The fire has gone quiet, and beyond it, someone waits with ash on his sleeve, smiling softly, finally at peace. Sleep in the stillness that comes when the work is truly done. The forge never made a sound again, not the way it once had, the echo of hammers. The hiss of quenched steel, the deep-bellied breath of bellows drawn slow, all of it had faded into the walls, into the floor, into the bones. Of the place, not gone, just settled the new blacksmith, no longer called boy, is no longer mistaken for apprentice, never tried to replace it. He built his own forge. In time, out behind the orchard, where the sun reached earlier and the rain didn't seep through. Roof, it was cleaner, quieter, but it did not carry the weight of what had come before. The old forge remained as it was. Dust gathered on the windows, cobwebs, stitched soft curtains between the tools left on the wall, and ash thin. Gray, weightless, drifted down like snow no one watched fall. It coated everything. The anvil, once so loud it could be heard 2 houses down, now rested beneath a layer of dust, so soft it looked like cloth. The breastplate still hung on the far wall, rusted, quiet, its shape unchanged, though its memory had softened. The crooked bell still leaned by the door when the wind blew right. It rattled once. Only once. The man came back often, though not to work. He would unlock the door, slowly, as though waking someone. Old from a deep and peaceful sleep, he would step inside, brush away the cobwebs without moving too much else. He never swept the ash. He let it lie, because the ash was not dirt, it was memory. It was labor made soft. It was fire cooled into rest. Sometimes, when the morning was quiet, he would bring the boy who now watched him another quiet child, another watcher. He didn't speak often, just looked, just stood near. The old hearth, with his hands folded like he was listening for something beneath the stone, and maybe he was. Maybe all of them still were, because the forge, even cold, still breathed, not with flame, but with the memory of every strike, every scar, every silence it had ever held. In time, the village stopped asking if it would be reopened. They called it the old smithy now, a place not of work, but of remembering. And the man, once the boy. Once the watcher kept the door unlocked in spring, so that wind and time, and soft-footed memory could pass through, so that the ash could settle where it pleased, so that the fire, though gone, could stay. Let your thoughts go still now. Let the dust fall gently. There is no more heat, only warmth. No more work, only rest. And ash, soft as sleep, settling where the fire once roared. Sleep now. You are part of it too.